Arrogant people are not as strong as they appear. Sometimes the loudest confidence hides the deepest fracture. You have seen them, the ones who speak over others without hesitation. They move through rooms as if certainty follows them like a shadow. They correct, dismiss, dominate, and rarely pause long enough to question themselves. But something in their tone feels slightly forced, slightly rehearsed. It is not strength that unsettles you. It is the performance. Real power does not need to announce itself every few minutes. Yet arrogance repeats itself constantly, almost anxiously. What if arrogance is not proof of superiority at all? What if it is a signal? A signal of something fragile underneath? Because every exaggerated display usually compensates for something unspoken. And the more extreme the display, the more desperate the protection. So the real question is not why they act superior. The real question is what they are afraid you might see. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. But first, you need to understand the illusion they are protecting. Imagine a person who walks into every meeting already convinced they're the smartest one in the room, interrupting before ideas finish forming, smiling as if debate is beneath them. Picture someone who corrects minor details in conversations, not because accuracy matters deeply, but because dominance must be maintained at all costs. Imagine a friend who never admits confusion, who laughs at complex topics instead of engaging them, who subtly shifts discussions away from anything unfamiliar. Notice how composed they appear in these moments, how certain their tone sounds, how effortlessly they dismiss perspectives that challenge their own. There is rhythm to their behavior, a predictable pattern of control that feels almost mechanical once you start observing closely. Control of conversation, control of status, control of perception, as if managing reality itself were simply another skill they mastered early. They believe they are steering every interaction, shaping how others see them, constructing an image that feels untouchable and complete. And from the outside, it often works for a while. People hesitate to confront someone so unwaveringly certain. Certainty can feel contagious, especially when delivered with volume and repetition, especially when doubt is treated like weakness. But control built on performance requires constant maintenance, and maintenance is exhausting even when it looks effortless. Every correction, every subtle put down, every exaggerated claim of competence is not random, it is strategic. Strategic not necessarily in conscious calculation, but in psychological preservation, like reinforcing a fragile structure before cracks widen. Because beneath the polished certainty is an assumption they rarely examine. The assumption that worth must be defended constantly. If they pause too long, if they hesitate publicly, if they admit uncertainty, something might collapse internally. So they preempt that collapse by dominating first, by defining the narrative before anyone else can question it. The illusion feels powerful because it prevents immediate threats, it reduces unpredictability, it shields them from visible vulnerability. And over time, they mistake this defensive choreography for genuine strength, confusing control with confidence. But real confidence does not require continuous reinforcement from the environment. Real confidence tolerates silence, ambiguity, even temporary incompetence without panic. Arrogance cannot tolerate those spaces because silence leaves room for exposure. So they fill the silence, they overstate, they assert, they amplify themselves before anyone can shrink them. What looks like dominance is often preemptive defense. What looks like superiority is often anticipation of attack. The illusion of control feels stable only because no one is pressed deeply enough yet. And when someone finally does, the first crack begins to show. If this is already making sense to you, it means you're starting to notice patterns most people never see. Subscribe, and let's keep exploring how the mind really works. Now, this is where things start to get uncomfortable. Imagine someone who dominates conversations easily until one unexpected question lands softly, and suddenly their voice tightens, their posture stiffens, their confidence hesitates. They laugh it off quickly, changing subjects, making a joke, as if nothing happened, yet something subtle shifted beneath the surface. Others may not notice, but the moment lingers internally, replayed later with irritation, defensiveness, and a quiet sense of being exposed. This is the first crack, not dramatic, not obvious, but deeply unsettling to someone whose stability depends on appearing unshakable. Arrogance survives on momentum, and cracks appear only when momentum slows, when certainty is interrupted by genuine unpredictability from others unexpectedly. In those moments, the arrogance does not disappear, it intensifies, becoming sharper, more dismissive, more desperate to regain control publicly quickly. This reaction is revealing, because true strength absorbs disruption, while fragile confidence reacts aggressively to preserve its image publicly carefully. The first crack is emotional before it is behavioral, a flicker of threat recognition that triggers internal alarm systems quickly. They feel something slipping, not status exactly, but the illusion of safety built around being unquestioned by others constantly present. This sensation is unfamiliar and therefore threatening, because their identity relies on predictability and dominance rather than adaptability under pressure. The crack widens quietly as they overcompensate, pushing harder, speaking louder, dismissing faster, while internally monitoring reactions obsessively from others. Control becomes reactive instead of stable, driven by fear of loss rather than grounded certainty of self-image publicly maintained. This is why arrogance escalates under challenge, because challenge activates the very weakness it tries to conceal from others externally. The first crack is rarely noticed by outsiders, but internally it changes everything about how the arrogant person navigates interactions. They become vigilant, scanning for threats, interpreting neutral feedback as attack, and preparing defenses before offense appears from others constantly. This vigilance feels like awareness, but it is actually anxiety disguised as certainty to themselves and others watching closely nearby. Once this crack exists, it cannot be fully repaired, because awareness has entered where denial once protected them psychologically internally. And from this point forward, arrogance is no longer effortless. It becomes labor to maintain daily, publicly, constantly visible control. The illusion begins leaking energy, demanding constant reinforcement, and the person senses exhaustion without understanding why internally over time alone. This exhaustion sets the stage for deeper conditioning that explains why arrogance forms in the first place within the brain. And that conditioning begins far earlier than most people realize, rooted not in power, but survival responses learned quietly early. Imagine a child who learns early that being wrong brings ridicule, dismissal, or withdrawal of attention from the people they depend on most. Picture them discovering that certainty earns approval, while hesitation invites correction, laughter, or subtle disappointment they cannot yet understand. They adapt quickly, presenting confidence before curiosity, assertion before exploration, because safety becomes linked to appearing sure. No psychology yet, just behavior forming quietly, shaped by repetition, reinforced by emotional consequence rather than conscious choice. The brain notices patterns relentlessly, even when the person does not, especially when those patterns involve belonging or rejection. Neural pathways strengthen around what works, not what is true, because survival always outranks accuracy at early developmental stages. Each time certainty protects them, the brain records relief, marking arrogance as a reliable shield against emotional threat. Over time, this response becomes automatic, bypassing reflection, bypassing doubt, bypassing vulnerability entirely. The arrogance feels natural now, not chosen, but embodied, expressed before thought can intervene. Conditioning does not ask permission, it installs responses quietly, through repetition and emotional intensity rather than logic. So when challenged later in life, the brain does not analyze, it reacts, deploying the familiar shield instantly. This is why arrogant reactions often feel disproportionate, because the brain is responding to old threats in new situations. The present moment becomes confused with the past, and the response feels justified even when it appears excessive. The person is not defending an idea, they are defending an emotional memory encoded deeply. Their nervous system associates uncertainty with danger, so dominance feels like regulation rather than aggression. If you have noticed this pattern in someone close, describe what happened. Someone reading may recognize themselves in it. The brain rewards this behavior chemically, reducing anxiety temporarily, reinforcing the loop without conscious awareness. Relief becomes the payoff, not superiority, even though superiority is the visible mask. Each successful assertion strengthens the pathway, making alternative responses feel increasingly inaccessible. Curiosity weakens, openness narrows, and identity begins forming around the conditioned response. The person does not feel arrogant internally. They feel protected, stabilized, regulated in moments of perceived threat. But the cost accumulates quietly, limiting flexibility, distorting perception, and exhausting emotional resources. Conditioning explains why arrogance persists even when it damages relationships and opportunities repeatedly. The brain values predictability over connection when survival pathways dominate. And this is where arrogance begins offering something deeper than protection, something that feels like reward. Arrogance persists because it pays something internally, something subtle, something rarely named, something that feels necessary even when it causes visible damage externally. The payoff is not admiration. Although admiration may appear temporarily, it is emotional regulation disguised as confidence and control. When arrogance activates, anxiety quiets, uncertainty retreats, and the internal noise softens just enough to feel relief. That relief becomes addictive, not consciously, but neurologically, because the brain remembers what calms it quickly. So arrogance is repeated, not because it feels good morally, but because it reduces discomfort efficiently. Each dismissive remark creates a momentary sense of grounding. Each correction restores internal balance briefly. The person is not chasing dominance. They are chasing silence inside their mind. This is why arrogance often appears during stress, fatigue, or perceived evaluation by others nearby. The louder the external assertion, the quieter the internal chaos becomes, at least temporarily. But relief is short-lived, requiring repetition, escalation, and stronger displays to achieve the same effect. This creates a loop where arrogance must grow to maintain emotional equilibrium internally. Over time, the person becomes dependent on external control to manage internal instability. They feel unsettled without asserting themselves, uncomfortable when not leading, uneasy when not correcting. Silence becomes threatening, not peaceful, because silence offers no distraction from internal uncertainty. The hidden payoff slowly reshapes priorities, shifting focus from understanding to asserting, from connection to control. Relationships become arenas rather than spaces. Interactions become performances rather than exchanges. The person may sense isolation growing, yet not connect it to their behavior clearly. Instead, they attribute distance to others being incompetent, insecure, or incapable of understanding them. This protects the payoff, preserving the loop, preventing reflection that could destabilize the system. Arrogance becomes self-justifying, because questioning it threatens the relief it provides. And what begins as a coping mechanism quietly evolves into something more permanent. It stops being something they do and starts becoming something they are. That shift marks the transition from behavior to identity, where escape becomes far more difficult. And once arrogance becomes identity, it stops responding to evidence entirely. Imagine someone who has been known for years as confident, decisive, intimidating, someone others rarely challenge openly anymore. Picture how uncomfortable it would feel for them to suddenly say, "I do not know," without immediately explaining or compensating. That discomfort is not social, it is existential, because their sense of self depends on consistency of image. Identity forms where behavior repeats long enough without contradiction. Arrogance becomes familiar, familiar becomes normal, and normal becomes who they believe they are. At this stage, arrogance is no longer defensive, it is foundational. Questioning it feels like questioning their own existence, their value, their coherence as a person. So the mind protects the identity aggressively, filtering information, dismissing feedback, reframing conflicts. Evidence that contradicts the identity is minimized or mocked, because accepting it would fracture self-continuity. The person may feel trapped without realizing why, compelled to perform a role they no longer consciously chose. They cannot soften without feeling weak, cannot listen without feeling diminished, cannot pause without feeling exposed. Arrogance now limits emotional range, locking them into narrow expressions of certainty and superiority. This rigidity creates loneliness, but loneliness is interpreted as proof of being misunderstood rather than self-imposed. If you have seen someone lose relationships while insisting nothing is wrong, describe what unfolded. Someone reading may recognize themselves in it. The identity trap tightens quietly, reinforced by reputation, expectation, and fear of internal collapse. Others now expect arrogance, which pressures the person to maintain it even when exhausted. Moments of doubt are suppressed quickly because doubt threatens the entire structure holding them together. They may feel envy toward people who appear relaxed, open, unthreatened by being wrong. But that envy is buried beneath dismissal because admiration would destabilize identity defenses. The trap is complete when arrogance feels unavoidable, when alternative ways of being feel inaccessible or dangerous. At this point, arrogance no longer reveals strength, it reveals entrapment. Yet, even entrapment serves a purpose because it still protects against something deeper. And what it protects against is not failure, but a terrifying question about self-worth. That question waits quietly beneath everything, and it has not been answered yet. At some point, arrogance stops looking like a personality trait and starts looking like a language, a way the mind speaks when something else feels unsayable. Seen this way, arrogance is less about believing you are better and more about needing the world to agree you are safe. The tone changes when you stop asking what arrogant people think and start noticing what their behavior is protecting them from feeling. Protection is rarely elegant. It is repetitive, blunt, sometimes embarrassing, because fear does not care about aesthetics. Arrogance simplifies reality. It flattens nuance into hierarchy, because hierarchy is easier to navigate than emotional uncertainty. When someone positions themselves above others, they reduce the complexity of connection. Superiority requires less listening than equality. Listening invites unpredictability, and unpredictability threatens carefully constructed internal narratives about worth and control. So the mind reframes arrogance as certainty, confidence, leadership, intelligence, anything that feels respectable enough to wear publicly. But underneath that reframe, the emotional engine remains the same, a constant scanning for signals of relevance, importance, and validation. This is why arrogant behavior often intensifies in new environments, unfamiliar groups, or moments where status feels unclear. The reframe is not that arrogance hides weakness, but that it reveals where emotional resources are being overused. Attention, dominance, correction, dismissal, these are currencies spent when internal reassurance feels insufficient. The behavior is loud because the underlying need is quiet but persistent. Once you see this, arrogance becomes less intimidating and more diagnostic, a signal rather than a verdict. And that signal becomes even clearer when the mind begins to shift its own story about who it must be. There is a moment, often unnoticed, when arrogance no longer feels empowering even to the person performing it. The posture remains, but the relief fades faster, requiring more intensity to achieve the same emotional stabilization. What once felt like confidence starts to feel like effort, something that must be maintained rather than enjoyed. This is where the quiet shift begins, not as change, but as awareness creeping into the background. The mind starts recognizing patterns, how superiority spikes during stress, how certainty sharpens when insecurity rises. Nothing dramatic happens, no confrontation, no collapse, just a subtle noticing that the behavior has a function. And functions can be observed without judgment. When observed, arrogance loses some of its hypnotic power. It becomes predictable, almost mechanical. Predictability creates distance, and distance creates space for reflection without defensiveness. This is not humility yet, it is neutrality. Neutrality allows the nervous system to pause its constant threat assessment, to stop interpreting every interaction as a status test. In that pause, something unfamiliar appears, not weakness, but relief from performance. Relief can feel disorienting at first, because identity was built around effort and assertion. But it also feels quieter, less brittle, less dependent on reaction. And in that quiet, a final mirror is waiting, one that reflects more than behavior. It reflects self-recognition. Picture someone who has always been the most certain voice in the room, the one others hesitate to challenge, the one who appears unshakable in every debate. Now imagine that same person alone, replaying conversations internally, analyzing tone, wording, reactions, wondering which moments felt slightly off balance. Outward dominance often coexists with inward scrutiny, a private monitoring system that never fully powers down, even after the audience has disappeared. The mirror here is not public humiliation or dramatic exposure. It is the subtle awareness that control did not produce peace. For years, arrogance may have functioned like armor, deflecting criticism before it could land, redirecting attention before vulnerability surfaced. But armor worn too long begins to feel heavy, especially when the battle exists mostly inside perception rather than reality. In the final mirror, the question shifts from how others see me to why I need them to see me a certain way. That shift is destabilizing because it removes the external target and places the spotlight inward, where explanations are less convenient. Superiority once felt like elevation, but in reflection it can resemble isolation, a self-imposed distance maintained to avoid emotional risk. Isolation protects from rejection, yet it also prevents genuine recognition, which is the very thing the arrogant posture often seeks. This contradiction is the weakness quietly revealed, not incompetence, not stupidity, but a fragile dependence on controlled perception. When perception becomes the primary source of safety, authenticity feels dangerous, because authenticity cannot be fully managed. The mirror does not accuse, it simply reflects patterns, showing how often confidence was activated most strongly in moments of perceived threat. Threat does not always mean danger. Sometimes it is just comparison, ambiguity, or the possibility of being ordinary. Ordinary is intolerable for someone whose identity fused with exceptionalism, because ordinary offers no guaranteed protection from insignificance. So the final mirror reveals something unexpected. The fear was never about others being superior. It was about being unseen without performance. And when performance is set down, even briefly, a new question forms quietly beneath the surface. If superiority was protection, then what remains when protection is no longer constantly required? Arrogance often begins as adaptation, a strategy developed quietly in response to moments when worth felt unstable or conditional. Over time, that strategy can harden into personality, repeated so frequently that it feels indistinguishable from identity itself. Yet identity built on defense must constantly justify its existence, scanning for evidence that the defense is still necessary. This is why arrogant behavior resurfaces most intensely in situations involving evaluation, comparison, or uncertain hierarchy. The behavior is not random, it is patterned, almost ritualistic, triggered by subtle cues that signal potential diminishment. What appears as ego is often vigilance. What appears as superiority is often preemptive stabilization of self-image. And the weakness revealed is not moral failure, but dependency on external confirmation to maintain internal equilibrium. When equilibrium relies on dominance, relationships become arenas rather than connections. Interactions become performances rather than exchanges. Eventually, even the person performing senses the strain, the constant calibration of tone, status, and impression management. That strain is rarely acknowledged aloud, because acknowledging it would require admitting the armor was never natural skin. Yet somewhere beneath the posture, there is always awareness, a faint recognition that effort has replaced ease. The quietest shifts rarely announce themselves. They simply alter perception slowly, until what once felt necessary begins to feel optional. And when superiority is no longer required to feel stable, something subtler emerges, something less visible but more sustainable. Not weakness, not dominance, just presence without performance. The question that lingers is not whether arrogance reveals weakness, but whether you can recognize the moment it appears within yourself. Because the most revealing mirror is rarely held by others, it is carried internally, waiting for stillness long enough to look.